Kind of scary. Well, I'm just letting you know welcome and sit down.
It's something about your presence.
No, I had actually been here for 3 minutes, but all of a sudden. I mean, you can talk till I start talking. This is not me talking. Hello, my name is Jane Gallop, and I'm from UWM here, and it is my pleasure to introduce Claire Colebrook. Claire Colebrook is Edwin Earl Sparks Professor of English at Penn State University. One of the things that is really, one of the first things that's very striking to me about actually Claire Colebrook's Vita, which I read, is that she's had a number of academic positions, but she's had academic positions on 3 continents in 2 completely different disciplines, which I think is quite impressive, extraordinary. I'm not going to tell you them all, but I will exemplify that. In addition to being Sparks Professor of English at Penn State, she was, from 2001 to 2008, Professor in English Literature at the University of Edinburgh. And then from 96 to 99, she was Senior Lecturer in Philosophy and Critical Theory in the Department of Philosophy at Monash University. So she's worked in Scotland and in Australia and in the United States. She's taught in English departments and in philosophy departments. Although the philosophy departments are in Australia, which makes it a little less extraordinary than it would be if it had been in the UK or in the United States. But still, that was not actually, to me, the most amazing thing about Claire Colebrook's Vita, which I only just saw yesterday. Claire Colebrook has published 16 books. The earliest was in 1997. I'm going to read you not all 16 titles, but a selection of those titles to give a sense of the areas she's worked in, the kind of wide range of areas, impressively wide range of areas she's worked in. Her first book in 1997 was entitled New Literary Histories, New Historicism, and Contemporary Criticism. She has also published 4 books on Deleuze, most recently Deleuze and the Meaning of Life, which was published in 2010. She's published 2 books on irony. In 2008, she published a book entitled Milton, Evil, and Literary History. I love this title. Milton, Evil, and Literary History, and the Meaning of Life. In 2013, she published a book entitled William Blake and Digital Aesthetics. She's co-authored 2 books with Tom Cohen and J. Hillis Miller. In 2011, the book Theory and the Disappearing Future, which is on demand on Benjamin. And forthcoming this year, The Twilight of the Anthropocene. This last book, The Twilight of the Anthropocene, is one of 5 books she has being published in 2014. So, this year. In addition to The Twilight of the Anthropocene is Agamben by Polity Press. Essays on Extinction, Volume 1, Death of the Posthuman, and Essays on Extinction, Volume 2, Sex After Life. And finally, forthcoming from Duke University Press, Fragility, Species, Planet, Archive. In addition to those 5 books, she has 2 articles being published in 2014. I won't even talk about all the other articles published before 2014. one of them is entitled Not Kant, Not Now, Another Sublime, and which is in Speculations. And the other is, and I'm not sure how to pronounce this, Archiveolithic, the Anthropocene and the Heteroarchive, which is in Derrida today. She also has 2 book chapters being published in 2014. One of them is called Incorporeal Modernism, and it's in Understanding Deleuze, Understanding Modernism. That's the name of the volume. And the other is called Screen Truth, and it's in a volume called A Critique of Judgment in Film and Television. Claire Colebrook has done an enormous amount of very influential work across a very wide range of topics. And I'm very excited to hear her speak today, and happy to introduce her.
Thanks a lot for the fulsome introduction, and also, like all the other speakers, I'd like to thank the Centre for 21st Century Studies, Richard Bruce and et al. For inviting me here. It's a very humbling and honouring experience to be here, very humbling. If you're asking yourself, how does a person write nearly 20 books in under 20 years? Don't listen to this paper and say, oh, now I know. Oh, that's how you do it. Yeah, just write, don't think. This paper's in 3 parts, and I think if you've got an overly long paper, the standard is to read the first section and maybe drop off the last 2. I'm going to cut the first 2, so I'm just going to tell you what you have the good fortune not to hear, and then move on to the body of the paper. So the first section on the paper was on concept that Jamie and I have been working on, which is indifferent difference. And someone said to us at lunch, what's indifferent difference? And our short answer was, who knows, but it just sounds really cool. But here's where I want to go with it, particularly in relation to the Anthropocene, which is that I want to argue that the Anthropocene, as articulated in the dominant, I mean, certainly not amongst critical thinkers such as our good selves, but the Anthropocene has had the function both of fetishising difference, as in there is one singular inscriptive difference that now comes to stand and erase all other differences. In short, once we discover the Anthropocene, it's like, oh my goodness, humans really are a unified, destructive species. We thought we were part of the planet and part of the ecosphere, and we're not. We are really destructive. And I take up Elizabeth Povinelli suggested that there's an element of this in Dipesh Chakrabarty's work, where he says, well, I used to be a post-colonial critic, and geez, that's no good anymore, because now there's just humans and we're all destructive. And it's got a good force in his argument, but it's not panned out that way. So it's a fetishisation of difference that's tended to erase other differences. It shifts the scale away from local political problems to how we are going to survive. And I want to make a case, being the Deleuzian that I am, although I'm over Deleuze now, I've moved on. But just to cash in a little bit more on that one. As a good Deleuzian, any inscribed difference has to have as its potential a far more profound difference that for Deleuze could be called indifference, as it's not yet differentiated, so the potential for difference. And those are the differences I want to talk about. That's section 1 that I didn't read, but I just gave a summary of. The second section addresses Richard's opening of this conference with the possibility of whether there is an Anthropocene feminism, or whether we should talk about Anthropocene feminisms. I want to make a case for the singular feminism and say that it may not be, feminism may not be unified extensively. There just may be many different points of view. But it is unified by one mode of problem. That is, feminism, as one overwhelming problem, generates the question of who. That is, who's Anthropocene? Who speaks? For whom? Who are you speaking for? And I think that applies particularly when we're talking about either the non-human or the inhuman, which is why I think this renders the Anthropocene problematic. Who's Anthropos? But more importantly, when you imagine that after we cease to exist, we will be readable as a strata, geologically, you're imagining a future geologist who privileges certain inscriptive technologies. So I want to say that in the spirit of feminism, who is this reader of our non-future? And I want to call the title of that section was "The Personal is the Geological," by which I mean, and I take that in any local problem that looks like a specific difference has as its condition of possibility a whole lot of unread differences. That's what Kate Millett meant when she said the personal was the political. And I want to say the personal is the geological. That is, when a person at Walmart is placed on a low or sub-poverty wage, that has geological conditions. That's dependent on near slave labour on some other part of the earth. And I think it was someone's, like, you know, the people in China that are creating the plastics that we send to Canada that we then send back to China and so forth. So the personal is the geological. Okay, so now this is the main body of the paper, and I promise to finish, if not on time, ahead of time. I know everyone will like me more. Like, so if I just cut it a wee bit. Okay, so what does the Anthropocene tell us? So I'm looking at the Anthropocene as an inscription. It's a claim for readability. So if the Anthropocene is consecrated, it is because it will be readable. It constitutes a significant difference, a difference that's going to make a difference. And if it doesn't get consecrated, it will be because it's deemed not to be that big a difference. So will we be readable? In what ways is it a game changer? In what ways does this event within knowledge and human history alter the relationship between thought and its outside? So I pan this out into three sections or three implications. What difference the Anthropocene makes. It has implications first, obviously, for the relationship between humanity and post-humanity, or non-humanity or inhumanity. And I think in a brief discussion I had with Richard before the conference started, we decided that post-humanism was bad, but inhumanism and non-humanism was good. So at least in all this disagreement we have some clear moral categories. So the implications for the Anthropocene for humanity and its non-humanity, for temporality and its relation to history, and also for sexual difference and its relationship to gender. I want to argue that the event of the Anthropocene reconfigures the relationship between humanity and post-humanity, history and temporality, and sexual difference and gender. So it's three problematic items. Everything's in threes today. I want to explore three possible implications, but also the way I want to do this is entertain what I'm going to refer to as the Anthropocene counterfactual. So I want us, between now and when I stop talking, and that will happen, I want us to entertain that what we are thinking of calling the Anthropocene, let's imagine that it doesn't take place. And there's several ways in which this counterfactual can occur. Let's imagine that human cataclysmic and irreversible destruction of the planet had not occurred. Had not occurred. Well, one way in which that would have not occurred is that maybe, one way in which that would not have occurred is if the human species had not evolved. I want to suggest that this is where we get to the fetishization of difference, because would we then be saying the planet would exist in some pristine, unaltered, natural form? And that here's my question, are we really the only species that makes a mark on the planet? It's just not true. Are we really the only living thing that has geological impact? It's clearly not. Well, I was going to say clearly not true. It's not. I don't think that's true. But that's one implication of the counterfactual. Here's the more interesting one, I think, using the word interesting in its broadest sense, which is what academics do. What would we lose or gain now that we know what we know? Would we think or act differently? So there's this sort of silly thing. I was like, oh my God, you mean we wrecked the planet? Jeez! I didn't see that coming. Blimey. And by that I mean not just, even if there weren't, let's entertain this, even if there weren't anthropogenic climate change. So that seems to be the goal. Oh no, all this stuff we've been doing, it's wrecking the planet. What we really mean wrecking the planet for us, and what we really mean is wrecking the planet, more importantly, for a certain type of us. The Prius, your fourth figure of the anxious consumer, the drive. So in my category of evils, I put post-humanists and people that drive a Prius. Sorry, I know there's bound to be someone in this room that does. It's just that I spent my life not driving. Like, I spent my life not driving, and there's people like, I drive a Prius. I was like, good for you. Now I drive this kick-ass four-wheel drive because I live in America, and that's what you have to do. But you know what? You know where I'm coming from, don't you, Steve? Okay, how many other times can I put my foot in my mouth? And I'm only on page 1. So the reason why, here's why I really want to pose this counterfactual, not just to make Stacey feel bad about driving a Prius, but for this reason, and it comes from sort of like it comes from Phenomenology 101, which is this: if something is possible, so if an accident, let's assume that climate change and the Anthropocene are an accident. Damn, we shouldn't have done that. Geez, that was bad. If something happens that's possible, then it can't be seen as purely external to life. That is, something in life, using that word in a broad, flabby and undefined way, but that's the whole problem of the concept of life. What is it in life that is capable of generating something like its accidental and cataclysmic destructiveness? What is life such that it can generate a species capable of destroying all life? And here is where I want to question this revived human exceptionalism that the Anthropocene seems to have legitimated. We think, oh, the humans were this only species capable of having geological impact. Goodness, it's not true. But we would have to think about, even if that were true, what is life such that it can do something like generate species-destructive humans? So that I think it was the first plenary we had that seems like 4 weeks ago, when Elizabeth Povinelli argued that all potentiation entails being extinguished. I think this is the point I'm trying to make is a variant of that, to see something as being able to be otherwise, to see something, so we can imagine that the planet might not have had humans, might not have had this self-destructive trajectory, but it would still have always had the potentiality, and how would that have played itself out? So here's what we can do. We can say that we can imagine a non-Anthropocene, or even a post-Anthropocene human. That is, what if we had evolved, developed differently? And at that point, when you say, what if we, here's where, what do you mean? What are the Anthropocene? I mean, a lot of the papers here have been saying, quite rightly, well, when we talk about the human species that destroyed the planet, we're not talking about all humans. We're talking, I just said myself, we're talking about a specific type. Here's the problem with that, which it's true. At what point do we stop? So do we get rid of all the Prius driving people and keep the cyclists? Well, no, because that's not going to help. So if we wanted to have a non-Anthropocene, non-planet scarring human, which it's possible to imagine, how much of the current human history would we have to erase? And obviously that's it's not a rhetorical question, but it's not a question that could be answered. So maybe we need to rephrase the question. What is humanity such that it may embark on a historical trajectory that it is destructive of all of humanity? And yet, how are we using the term humanity here? So the Anthropocene seems to unite all humans, erasing the difference, but then really raises the question, at what point could we have been otherwise? What sort of humanity could we imagine as the one I'm assuming that we can't be saved now, that we've passed that threshold. So now we're looking at, well, if we had acted differently, if we could rewrite the script, at what point would we stop, or where would we stop? Would it be in Indigenous Australia, or would it be sometime in the 6th century? I don't know. We can readily admit that extinction is intrinsic to life, and maybe extinction in an even broader sense, in the sense of things ceasing to exist and surviving as inscription, is the broader milieu from which life emerges. After all, we know that life, as we know it, if we know it, we know that life emerges from catastrophic change, and that human life emerges not only after the mass extinction of non-human species, but also in a species bifurcation. So we can just as well imagine in this counterfactual that there are some Neanderthals, but they wouldn't be in a lit conference room like this, because they'd be the counter-Anthropocene. They'd have to find some other way of archiving and communicating that wasn't going to wreck the planet. So we can imagine these different historical trajectories. So let us entertain the counterfactual. Humans came into being, but did not develop technology to the point where the geological impact of the Anthropocene took place. Now, I've just said that what I mean is this type of geological impact, the geological impact that's resulted from massive redistribution of the Earth's biomass, carbon emissions, and nuclear waste, the three things that will contribute. But there are, of course, other geological. Let's say that one didn't take place. Some evidence of what such a society, or such a humanity, might look like is offered in societies that have not employed industrialised agriculture, which alters the Earth's biomass. And it's that original transition into industrialised agriculture that enables sedentary, non-nomadic cultures, which in turn enables metabolic storage of energy, which enables some humans not to be devoted to the earth and manual labour, which then allows some humans to develop what Jared Diamond has called kleptocracy. That is, you start to live off what you've taken from everyone else. You develop priesthood. With that, you develop an archive. With that, you get people allowing themselves to die for their country. So we're going way back at what point the Anthropocene ball started rolling. Can we imagine a world of industrialised agriculture and production not dependent on fossil fuels? So let's say in this counterfactual, which is logically possible, let's say there was this stuff. In fact, I think there is a theory out there, and I'm ashamed to say I heard it on Fox News, which I watched for purely anthropological purposes, where there is a theory that the Russians discovered sometime during the Cold War that oil was not finite. Apparently, it's us idiot Americans that think that it's us idiot greeny lefty Americans that think that we're wrecking the planet. Actually, it's an infinite resource and not wrecking the planet at all. So let's imagine this Goldilocks universe. But let's just imagine it's just bad luck that our technology was premised on something that wrecked the planet. It's just bad luck. Things could have been different. If that was so, if we could have all this without climate change in the Anthropocene, would we say, yeah, actually, that's okay now. It's okay. So it's only climate change that's going to make us, if there is such a thing. So can we imagine a world of industrialised agriculture and production not dependent on a non-renewable resource and a non-renewable resource that wrecks everything else? So here's our counterfactual scenario before we go on to look at what has become of history, humanity and sexual difference in the actual Anthropocene that unfortunately we have. So first possibility, humanity could have developed differently, remaining more nomadic and with a sense of history more attuned to the broader rhythms of the earth, beyond that of the human agricultural year and its seasons. This possibility is suggested in Nigel Clarke's work on what he calls Aboriginal cosmopolitanism and different forms of human culture that not only work with rather than against nature, but also have a time and a history beyond that of the calendrical year that we have. In the, I think, London Review of Books, Zadie Smith wrote what she referred to as an elegy of the seasons. And she says, we all have this experience. Mine is when I was growing up, you knew it was exam time because you could smell jasmine. Summer's coming. And so you have this yearly cycle. And she says, well, that's going, because we've wrecked the planet. But what she's really saying is not the natural. What's going is a very stabilised nature that's a result of a particular fragment of the Holocene. And what's returning is a volatility that one could say is more natural, but that's stupid now. So you might say there's a different, deeper temporality that's more natural. What I think Nigel Clarke's work on this notion of there are some humanities that exist with a temporality of climate change. That is, their culture has a sense of this period of stability is one we have for here and now that emerges from climate volatility. That quite brilliant work by Nigel Clarke seems to me to deconstruct the opposition between anthropogenic climate change and non-anthropogenic climate change. And you notice this when you teach it, because particularly if you teach it in central Pennsylvania, because there's always 50% of your students that read out, see, there's always been climate change. This is just, we didn't do anything, this is just what happens. Which is sort of what he's saying, but it's now happening at a different intensity. But climate change is the reality from which a brief period of industrialised techno-agriculture has manufactured a form of seeming stability, which has then created further volatility. So there's a suggestion in Nigel Clarke's work on Aboriginal cosmopolitanism that we deconstruct the opposition between climate change denials claims that major climatic shifts are part of the way of the world, and the ecological insistence on the anthropogenic violence done to climate stability. So I want to suggest we get rid of the Zadie Smith elegiac attitude that we're ruining this beautifully humanised, cyclic, harmonious nature. That's a nature that's coterminous with the period from Kant to the present, where you could look at nature as though it were made for humans. That's a result of industrial agriculture. The condition for the possibility of that harmonious, as if it were made for nature, the nature that we're losing, was itself manufactured and is what got us into this mess. So what is different about the era of the Anthropocene and anthropogenic climate change on a massive industrialised scale is not that a stable nature has been disturbed, but that humans have stabilised a nature that they saw as volatile to them, and imposed a mechanised and rigid timetable of production based on hyperconsumption. So to think the counterfactual of the Anthropocene would not be to imagine, then we'd be back with this stable nature. It would actually be just a different form of volatility. So that's possibility, counterfactual possibility. One is to start to imagine that there was a different type of humanity, one that didn't impose this harmonious, natural, human-friendly stability. Second possibility is to imagine that the material composition of the world had been otherwise, and that exactly the same technological industrial complex could have occurred, but that it drew on a renewable resource that did not pollute the atmosphere. So let's say the geoengineers come up with something tomorrow, and it both repairs the damage we've done, averts the ongoing damage that we are doing now, and finds someone new. Let's just say that happens. So those are the two scenarios. If we entertain the first scenario, that is that humans, the hyper-consumption humans develop differently, how would what we come to know as humanism, post-humanism, history, and feminism be different? So let's imagine humans did develop in an eco-friendly manner, whatever that is. One possibility is that there would be no such thing as the human. Actually, I think that would be definitely. You wouldn't have the human without globalism and abstract thought, formal logic and so forth, which relies upon a universalising global imperative that abandons localism and imagines the here and now as being not simply present for me, but present for any subject, whatever. So here's where I'm drawing on what it is, the Eurocentric narrative that's given, by Husserl amongst others, that at a certain point in human history, in Athens, these humans thought about what it is to be a subject in general. That sounds very it is very Eurocentric. But if you flip it, it's like these few humans thought about humanity in general, and it's because of them that we have to drive some scummy little Prius as opposed to a Cadillac or something. So you could see that globalising, imperialising humanity as such imperative, which is the condition for the possibility of human rights discourse and liberalism in its good sense, and the work of people like Negrestani, Ray Gracia, and this notion of the human, the heart negri, global humanity, living labour, immaterial labour, is premised on that moment of universalising humanity. Civilisations of industrial complexity are not simply knowledge events, but rely on the harnessing of human power. So it's no accident that universalising imperative begins in a slave society and continues with slavery up until the emancipation of women in the 18th century and the emancipation of literal slaves in the 18th century, which disturbingly, but not accidentally, occurs alongside industrialism. So you think about it, all of us here who are academic females, one of the reasons why we're here is because of the industrialism that developed a form of domestic scene, which meant we could go to work. Of course, it's possible that sexual politics had developed differently and that men and women share the domestic labour. But it is the case that everything that we know as industry, technology, but also the humanities, is premised on slave labour. Not accidentally, I don't think. This draws upon a point made by, again, Dipesh Chakrabarty, when he speaks about the Anthropocene, and he asks us to entertain this thought: if there hadn't been slavery, the damage to the planet would have been worse. By which he means it was when we started harnessing the Earth's resources that we stopped using unpaid human labour. Which is not a way of saying, let's go back to slavery to save the planet. It's to face up to what industrialisation cost to develop in terms of human energy, and what projects like humanism and feminism, for all their good, their grubby history, which adds new weight to the claim that every document of civilisation is a document of barbarism. It's the same sense, but it makes it more profound, I think. That is, it's only with intensive production that something like non-nomadic culture can emerge, and that can then produce enough energy to generate culture in the highly narrow sense. When we say the problem with Australians is they've got no culture, that sense, not culture in that anthropological sense. And what's that? How do you tell the difference between an Australian and yogurt? Yogurt, left on its own, develops its own culture. So, culture in that sense, capital C culture. So it's only with complex archival inscription could we have both the expansion of empire and the technological history that generates global hyperconsumption. So we might say that it would be well worth sacrificing Euclid and Newton. I mean, we might say that Euclid, Newton, Milton, Blake, Shakespeare, if that would be a sacrifice, and would it be a sacrifice? I don't know. And not embark on the path to globalism and universal humanism. So this is one possibility. We would lose human rights, I think, but then we might not require them as much. That is to say, there would not be the massive industrialised human-on-human violence that is a product of industrial technological globalism. But there would neither be the industrialised violence of genocide and mass slaughter in warfare. I mean, if we're really sacrificing, what led to the Anthropocene. Nor would there be the violence required to develop these potentialities for violence. That is, it's only with the appropriation of surplus labour that a culture can develop, in the sense that we know it, in the sense that we're talking about it in the Anthropocene. Because it's only through archived memory, symbolic systems that enable organised sacrifice and slavery that then generate religion, culture, mass warfare. So if globalism has been one of the crucial conditions for the sense of the universally human, that's my assumption. It's also the case that the ethical demand of the universally human seems imperative in a violent cosmos. So both human rights develop because of human violence. The complexities of culture that enable something like the articulation of human rights in the United Nations, however problematic those institutions are, have a history of violence behind them, and it's hard to imagine, but not impossible to imagine, a different human history where those same concepts emerged without the history of violence, appropriation and so on, but it's a hard task to imagine it otherwise. So that would be one counter-Anthropocene world. We'd have to think what parts of culture we would sacrifice in order to avoid A, the sacrifice of the planet, and B, the sacrifice of other humans. So I think this is when we have that Benjaminian phrase about every document of civilization being a document of barbarism. It's not just that the Nazis listened to string quartets. It's not about contamination. It's about entailment. It's about how much appropriation of either other humans or the planet you require for the sort of metabolism that enables abstraction, formalism, and ethics. Which is not to say it's impossible, it's just to say that it's difficult. So let's accept this very inconvenient truth. What we know narrowly, this is moving on to the next, what we know narrowly as feminism relies, and when I say narrowly as feminism, I mean narrowly, like Mary Wollstonecraft. So what we know, like when you go to do an analytic philosophy course and you're told feminism begins 18th century, Mary Wollstonecraft. What we know narrowly as feminism relies on the hyperconsumption mode of globalism. It relies upon a reading elite liberated from domestic labour, able to use the trope of slavery and its opposite, so Wollstonecraft's writing precisely at the same time and alongside the abolitionist movement. It relies on the idea of liberating humans from their nature. It's true that perhaps such feminist rights would not have been required if there hadn't been an original sexual contract. So this is this other possibility that humans developed without the sexual division of labour. But some violent, this is the claim I want to put out there, some violent subjection of humans as resource energy is required or was required to release the time and space of the history of enlightenment, using the word enlightenment in its broader sense, in the sense that Adorno and Horkheimer use it from Odysseus to the present. Philosophy, rights, and the constitution of a private self with a definitive sexuality and a fulfilling life are not merely contingently placed alongside planetary and human violence. Rather, there's an essential relationship between geological impact, human on human impact, and everything that we would like to affirm as the ecological, the ethical, the human. So this counterfactual brings us not so much to another possible world without humanism, a single history of human enlightenment and private sexuality, but a threshold. This is where I want to go back to difference. What are we prepared to sacrifice? What do we want to save? And if we do, look now at the Anthropocene as, geez, we screwed up, we shouldn't have done that. What's the other possible world? It's possible to imagine a minimal impact on the planet that would still and could not be some pure nature. So if we're saying the Anthropocene occurred as an event, if the Anthropocene occurred as an event, it's happened, must have been possible for it not to occur, I guess. If something occurs, it's possible. If it's possible that it didn't occur. Let's erase humans, let's erase the Anthropocene. Do we then get this lovely planet that doesn't inscribe itself? Of course not, because there were extinctions before us, there were inscriptions before us. It's possible to imagine a minimal impact on the planet that would still not be some pure nature and would still allow for many of the things we know to be human. There could still be inscription, morality, language and technology, but it wouldn't have reached a certain threshold. And it would have not developed to a suicidal pitch, by which I mean a global universalising pitch. And most importantly, it would have been incapable of forming the concept of the Anthropocene. I mean, that's obviously, without everything that's been done to create the Anthropocene, you wouldn't have the geological discipline and the technology capable of reading it as such. So let's explore, and this is, I promise I'm not going to go over time. Let's explore the second counterfactual, so this is the briefer, and ask if we could have these reparative effects of globalism and humanism without damage to the planet. Let's say we've got this magic fuel, and without the violent extraction of human resources. That is, we would not have a tidy, humanist and universally oriented Athens. So you can't, if we really are going to go back to some form of pristine planet, is it possible to imagine a resource that was non-violent and yet allowed for the thought of humanity to be generated? Is such a world logically possible? And I want to conclude by suggesting, so this is where I just say everything I've just told you is correct, that this whole counterfactual way of imagining is symptomatic of the logic of the Anthropocene, and it's the geoengineering logic, if you like. And it's the, here's where I say who's Anthropocene and for whom, because it implies we're looking at this now, oh damn, I left a stain on the carpet. I shouldn't have done that. What am I going to do to repair it? And it has a certain narrative, it has a certain inscriptive technology, and this whole, the whole logic of the Anthropocene tends to have this sort of counterfactual imaginary, where we imagine a different sort of species we could have been otherwise. And I think this comes out very symptomatically in the recent work of someone like Megha Astani, but also this supposed speculative realism that is about thought. It's, you know, thought can imagine, yes, I can imagine, you know, the future's the future, you know, it's incalculable. Well, it's incalculable, but it's not infinitely malleable. So that idea is, this whole counterfactual logic, that it might have been otherwise. It's part of what drives technological industrial investment, which is precisely about what minimally do I need to take in order to stay exactly as I am. If we use less, we can sustain ourselves. If we can adapt, if we mitigate, it's all about privileging the difference between me and it. We could have been otherwise. Imagine if it could be otherwise. The notion of ultimately being able to give, being able to take more than one gives, some pure ecology in which life could occur without a debt to the planet or anything else, is precisely symptomatic of what got us here in the first place. There is no us. Where does this leave us? There is no us. Where does this leave us? Are we just saying, am I just saying, is this all I'm saying? This is when you get to the end of the paper and you say, am I just saying that all life is entwined with death? Is that what I'm just saying? And that all ethical relations involve violence, because if that's what I'm saying, then I'm not saying anything new. Probably not saying anything new. And am I just saying that feminism is a grubby queer business that can do so much for so few? No, I hope not. If that is what we're saying, then we'd be keeping the counter-Anthropocene ideal in place. Yes, there's this pure world we can imagine. It's never fully desirable, so we minimise our impact. We get from it what we can without, you know, we've got to be violent to humans, but not too violent. There's going to be some appropriation, not too much. Sure, I'm prepared to admit that the condition for the possibility of Mary Wollstonecraft is the whole history of slavery, which she fought against, but I can think it might have been possible otherwise. I hope I'm arguing something stronger. That is implications for how we think about the Anthropocene. All our talk of mitigation and stability, adaptation, survival, and so on, maintains, so this is my conclusion, maintains a notion of stabilised nature, mitigation, sustainability, adaptation. That stabilised nature is manufactured at the point at which problematically Anthropocene has been invaded. So that is my sort of literary critic point, that emergence of nature as this harmonious, as if it were made for humans, a nature in which the bedbugs don't bite. That's a part of the industrial agricultural technological complex. A nature that is ideally there for us but doesn't have us in it, and that is cyclically compatible with renewable production. I mean, the word renewable is probably nothing's really renewable, except for those little worms we saw. You can cut them in half and they go on. Apparently, so it does not confront this whole notion of renewability, sustainability, and counter-Anthropocene. Does not confront what the Anthropocene occludes. We should not think at precisely the point at which we posit a geological impact of a certain readable sort that had we known this, geez, if I'd known it was going to be this bad, I would have acted differently. Oh, now that we know that it's this bad, we're going to start, this is, you know, the wake-up call motif. Or put another way, the Anthropocene is the counter-Anthropocene. That is, it is us looking at our own inscribed history and thinking, geez, that's bad, we've got to rewrite this. We look at the geological scar as an act of narrative self-reading and self-redemption. And we say to ourselves, as though something has changed, so as though this is a game changer. Because what I want to suggest that even if climate change, even if anthropogenic climate change did not exist, its economy was already there in the planet. We were already, you know, there was anthropogenic human change, if you like. We already appropriated and scarred our own part of our own three-quarters of our own species. We look at, and other species, you know, so if there's not climate change in the very narrow sense of climate, i.e. our ecosystem that's good for us, there's a lot of other stuff going on. But as Conrad said, it's not too pretty if you look too closely at it. We look at the geological scar and we say to ourselves, as though something has changed, now finally the Earth is telling us we have impact. Like, where were you looking? We are not at all post-human or ecological, and we've now found ourselves to be exceptionally human again. But that notion of exceptionally human, oh goodness me, we have geological impact, relies on a very narrow sense of geological impact, as in readable for us. I'm not saying it doesn't exist. It is inscribed, but there are other inscriptions. It's from that event of self-reading that we once again return to self-recognition, self-redemption, self-renewal, and we return to human exceptionalism. I've got another section on state of exception, but I'll stop there, mercifully. Thank you. Yes.
Like use all the culture, right? And that is the one thing, and then you just get paralyzed.
Culture.
Doesn't that show that isn't that like historical imagination, that to say, well, let's go back to, let's say, 6th century.
Sure.
That if we got rid of everything that came after, then what would have, we would have ended up with the culture of the 6th century.
Yeah, no, and that's what.
There could have been so many different histories.
Exactly, and including one where the sexual division of life. I mean, because this is where I started reading. Here is where it is a game changer. Stuff that used to look totally crazy to me because it was too monolithic historically. Adorno and Horkheimer's dialectic of enlightenment, Schullem and Firestone, you know, like, it's like, here's patriarchy, and you know, you're thinking like that's so blunt, that's so stupid. And now you're thinking, no, we've got deep time. There's something, you know, like there is something, because, you know, if you're in an English lit department, the complaint used to be, well, you work in modernism, you work in postmodernism, you work in contemporary. I'm stuck in the medieval period, and you gave us 500 years, right? And the implication was you should break down the medieval. You know, like, no, the idea is you should put all of it into this big lump called enlightenment or patriarchy. And then you get the Schullem and Firestone idea, which is you say, yeah, you lack of it. And that sort of English literature, you know, like dismissiveness of that is what you're saying. It's a lack of imagination. It's like, well, maybe there is something. Because when we say what's outside you know, when anyone says something outside capitalism, the first level of that question is stupid, right? Because you just want to imagine something iconic. No. But you're right. What if there really was a culture that didn't have the sexual division of labour, that didn't have sexual like that made all of Freud and psychoanalysis impossible, right? So, no, because there's
Maybe there was something else, right?
yeah, I know, no, and that's
Potentiality.
exactly. But what I'm saying is and only I think the force I would say when you said it's a lack of imagination, absolutely. But I guess what I'm trying to suggest is it's not a small lack of imagination. I mean, it's going to take a lot of imagination. Like when you say someone that's a bit of a lack of imagination, I'm hoping you're not saying, oh, hey Claire, couldn't you have thought of just like tweaking it a bit? No, I mean, like it's a big.
I mean, we're all kind of struggling with these questions, right? And it's just
Yes.
What would an alternative?
Exactly.
World,
And what I want to suggest,
speculative
yes, and when, exactly, but when you don't want to have other forms of non-Western human, you either have 6th century, as though, well, if you go back enough in white Western humanism, you'll eventually get back to, Australian Aboriginal. No, I'm not suggesting that. No, either we go back to the 60s or we go on, But when you start to look at the existent possibilities, there's, at what would a really non-anthropocene, like a non-impact, non-violence, it doesn't exist, okay? So in its pure form, it doesn't exist. You can't have life without impact, yes. So it's a beyond good and evil question, right? And the problem with the Anthropocene is that it's a beyond good and evil question in a different way. It's the Anthropocene has been beyond good and evil in managerial. Okay, we're fucked, so now we've got to, okay guys, this is serious. We have to do something now because it's not just polar bears or something. But so that it's become beyond good and evil in a managerial way. But what you're talking about is no, it's got to be what would you imagine? What would you? Yeah. So.
No, it's in conversation with this, but I'm a little surprised that we're going to be. I don't know. I'm a little surprised how quickly we're going to be imagining. I thought one of the, and maybe this is just imagination, but I thought one of the very interesting things you're pushing on is, like we say, oh my God, we're going to be extinguished, so let's roll back on. And roll back and exfoliate.
Yeah.
We'll just do a little scrub.
Yeah, exactly. Clean up our act.
And we'll exfoliate little things so that we can exist without the fear of extinction.
Yes,
Okay,
exactly.
and I think what you're saying, which is I think really right, is that actually the exfoliation, if done well, would mean that you were within a situation which indeed you could be extinguished at any moment, because we would be so rolled back,
Yes,
not to make the kind of impact we're making,
exactly.
that other kind of impacts would be there, which are
Yes.
there in certain places, and therefore you could not have the experience of hoping to exfoliate so that you would have to
Exactly.
worry about extinction.
Yes.
Because that's not the, of course
No,
it would be.
that's
That
right.
wouldn't even be on the table.
Yeah.
So, and that is, if you want, radically good, for me, and good imagination, except of course the places we really see this are in the shitholes of the Anthropocene.
Yes. Yeah. I
In
think
the real shithole of the Anthropocene, so for instance, a daughter of mine who said, hey Beth, we're talking about, we're talking about how much money eggs make. And we were talking about differential. And I said, how much do you make for a year? And she said, well, if you do all the forms, this is, she said, if you do all the forms, probably about 10,000.
Yeah.
I like that. And she said, white people say that they want $10,000. But Aboriginal people,
Yeah.
they know how to.
Yeah.
And I was like, right, okay. So, there's a kind of rolling back there too, exfoliation.
Sure.
But again, it's not an exfoliation where you would not have to worry about extinguishment. It's that you're worried about extinguishment every day.
That's it.
And I,
Exactly.
that's what I think we're doing.
For me, the text of the Anthropocene is not Cormac McCarthy's The Road, but Cormac McCarthy's The Council, which was a universally panned film, which I see as the greatest feminist film of all time.
What's it called?
The Councillor. It was given 1 star and was in the cinema for 2 weeks, and I'm the only person in the universe that thinks it's a good film, except for probably Cormac McCarthy.
You're the only one that saw it.
Yeah, because precisely to your point, it's about this white, affluent lawyer who has this gorgeous Penelope Cruz girlfriend who gets chopped up for a snuff movie at the end. But he goes to Mexico. He ends up he does a bad drug deal and ends up in Mexico. And I see that, you know, for McCarthy, Mexico isn't Mexico, it's not this place. It's, you are one bad deal away from a world in which any limb could be severed, right? And all your fantasies about your beautiful girlfriend is what's standing between you and Mexico. Mexico stands for what you get in the road, which is you're a hair's breadth away from total volatility. And one of the lines, that's great because there's these gangsters in the film that are clearly read like Laruelle and Badger. They say, you think, you know, counsellor, and this is one of the gangsters says, the extinction of all reality is a concept no resignation can accomplish, and then he kills him. So, but it's you're always, and that's Adorno and Horkheimer's dialectic of enlightenment. Is in the beginning is absolute volatility, and this nature that we have, right? And you're right, it's not, step away from it and we're all living, I don't know, hippies? I've got nothing wrong with hippies, they make good food, but it would be, no, it's not that, it's Cormac McCarthy's Mexico, right? Absolute disease, volatility, violent, and when you say violence, not because you're going to be gunned down, just volatility on all fronts, yeah. Yes, so thank you for bailing out my imagination.
Does the counterfactual map onto Voltaire's quote about God that didn't exist, we would need to invent it? Is that sort of the figure of the Anthropocene? If it didn't exist, we would need to have invented it? Does that map onto the counterfactual?
Oh, that's interesting, because one of, like this is, as everyone says, this is part of the book, and I look at Voltaire's poem on the Lisbon earthquake, which is a bad poem because it's written by a philosopher, but he's disgusted. He's really disgusted at Enlightenment philosophy which is getting back to this, you know, that actually this world is harmonious. So it's not quite if God didn't, it's actually, let's remove, it's not if God didn't exist, it's if nature didn't exist, we'd have to invent it. Yeah. Because what he's really disgusted with is a vision of universal harmony, right? In which it's true these people died in this earthquake, but that's part of the whole cosmos of, you win some, you lose some. And it's not. There's this point at which there's just tragic loss. It's the Lisbon earthquake, and he's disgusted. So he's disgusted in that occasion, not with the theological God. He's disgusted with people like, it's Rousseau he's really, hacked off with. So, let's rephrase that. If God didn't exist, you'd have to, if nature didn't exist, we'd have had to. And that's what we did. We invented it by certain technologies invented nature.
Yes, an observation and maybe a question. Observation, I was surprised when you talked about describe the Anthropocene having occurred as an event. I mean, given your Darwinian history.
Oh, it's not an event.
Right, the event is, is in fact all those counterfactuals are all.
Sure, it's not an event,
So in a way, I think what you're saying, in a sense, is the Anthropocene is, in a way, an event, or the counterfactual event.
Yeah.
Anyway, just you know, we did have this conversation about agreeing on post-humanist being bad.
Sorry.
But you wanted to hold on to inhuman, and I wanted to hold on to non-human.
Yeah.
And I think that I have a problem with the inhuman. I think the way you're using inhuman seems to me to do what we both seem to agree was wrong with post-human, which is to privilege the human.
The non, yes,
And kind
yes.
of human as exception, which the entire talk was about us. It was about,
Sure.
well, what would we have given up? What would
Yeah.
we sacrifice and so forth? And so, in you know, the non-human implications of any of this seem
Yeah.
pretty much not, at least in this talk, part of what we're dealing with. So, does your notion of inhumanity then become just another version of post-humanity?
Yeah. Good.
Or
Yeah.
in fact, is there a place for the non-human impacts of not just anthropocenic change, but of culture?
Yeah.
All of these things?
So yes, it's not not in the. You're right about the Deleuzian occurs not in the but in the what do you call counter-actualizing. I really take your point about the inhuman, but just accidentally, to my horror, I read Negrostani's Labour of the Inhuman, and this is coming out of, this is sexy stuff. This is not Richard Rorty. This is not, Michael Pops. This is like the cool stuff the kids are reading. And it's precisely as you're saying. I mean, he's anti-post-human because he thinks, well, post-human just puts us in with animals and plants, and that's really, weak. Okay, fine. Acknowledge difference and complexity and the violence of relations, and and then he says, like my voice goes up 5 octaves, and then he says, and the human, in this wonderfully Sartrean existential way, and the essence of the human is to have no human, and therefore all we are is there is no human, therefore we are inhuman, and you're right, it's, if one wanted to be precise, yes, and that's just this problem of, okay, I could invent myself, otherwise I'm, infinitely malleable, and I can, and which means humanism's always been inhuman. I mean, it's always been what defines the human is it has no, give me the one person that says we know exactly what humans are, this is what they are, end of, let's move on. No, it's humans are self-defining, they have no essence, their essence is to give themselves and go, Aquinas and so. So I think, yes, I don't know why I was so late. I just didn't pay attention to that, and then it was only, I think I read it on the aeroplane coming here, I was reading Inhuman, Non-Human, and thought, it's a different, there's no sort of intrinsic reason why one wants to make that difference. It's just panned out that way, that you're right, and actually it would be useful to make it tripartite, so you could say it's not just post-humans, because humanism's always been post-humanism, but to a certain extent humanism's always been an inhumanism, and those two things are different. So yeah, I fall on my sword at this.
No, I think actually we agreed at a moment with the common enemy of the post-human.
Yeah.
I think finally we don't agree in that, for me the human is not about the negation of the human,
Yes.
or the absence of the human. For me, the human is about the distribution and collaboration with all sorts of things,
Yes.
including all those microbes in our gut,
Yeah.
but also with.
But that's
we
agreed.
with, and that's very different move than the Negastani. or
Sure,
any
sure.
other.
And also, that's what I mean by saying the Anthropocene fetishizes difference, because it's this human looking on human history difference, as though it's true that it's an intensive difference. All things make an impact, but just because all things make an impact, you don't want to say, so we're not so bad after all. There's singular points and thresholds where this is the impact that makes the difference on all the other impacts. So it's an intensive difference. But that difference doesn't erase all the other differences and non-differences. So yes, that's why the Anthropocene fetishizes this difference, but it does so by erasing a whole lot of indifferences from which other differences could emerge.
And that's why volatility rather than event.
Yeah.
Without hearing volatility as simply another word for them.
It's
I think
different.
Yeah, that's why I think
Different,
it's really important to say,
Yeah.
we're talking about volatility that sometimes has these intensive
Yeah.
compacts, but we have to be, I think, careful not to say shapes and bends, because there's all sorts of scales and intensities of volatility.
That are multiple.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In terms of scale, it did change that the two of you had just a minute ago. It was interesting that you both shifted from human and species to individual stories or individual people. And
Yeah.
yeah, I sort of left you to talk about that kind of.
Except it's not, it's, in a way it's not, I actually, even though I referenced an author, you know, it's it's a world, right? So the reason why it's an individual is because an individual told that story, right? But it's not, hey, well, you know, this is that world. And I mean, one of the, I'm on a McCarthy thing at the moment, but you know, one of the lines that goes throughout it, you think you can return to that world. That world doesn't exist. Right? It's just like, but wait a minute, what can I do to fix this? And this gangster's like, sorry, you think you can, you keep talking like you can refer, and that's, in a way, that's where it's not individual, it's this world we want back. It's just, it had that way of conveying it was relayed on these two occasions by two individuals. But we've been hearing papers in this conference about worlds, right? So that this thing that we imagined, that's why I said feminism is about, it's a war of inscription. It's for whom, from what point of view, at what temporality. So that's, to me, all the wars within feminism are wars of that. You know, it's like, my rights, you know, my autonomy. It's like, well, that's good, right? That's good, but look at that in the broader picture of global liberalism. And, you know, so, and I think when you have that sort of like an individual testimony, it's about, well, what sort of worlds does that signify? And there's human articulations of world.
I was really wondering about this idea of the personal and the geological.
Yeah, I'm committed to that.
If you could, we have
Because-
a little bit, because it's an interesting.
Okay, because that came from, to me, when I was living in Britain, and it's a really good gesture that a certain school of cultural studies, like the Birmingham School of Cultural Studies, which has now been erased, would say, someone would I attended a paper by an economist. I didn't know this, probably the only person in the universe not to know this, that the Robinson Crusoe narrative in economics has a completely kosher, you know, like it's not got seen as racial or ideological. It's like a thought experiment. Okay, you landed on an island. So it's not deemed to be. It's a thought experiment that functions in economics, like still, and it's like, okay, so someone put up their hand, a woman put up her hand and said, don't we need a political reading of this? By which she meant the history of slavery, you know. So political means what's the network of humans that went into that event, so that you had Robinson Crusoe encountering Friday, and it looks like a person-on-person encounter. It's not. Right? A whole history of empire and markets and travel and other humans, and that's how people read Conrad's Heart of Darkness, isn't it? That the encounter between one human and another has a whole network of industry, maritime slavery, technology. That's true. It's a scale, right? But there's another scale again, which is the geological scale, so that you can say, well, how was it possible for Crusoe to turn to Friday and call it Friday for a start? Well, because a whole industry of slavery and maritime capitalism is led up to that moment. But to lead up to that moment is the emergence of the very possibility of division of labour that occurs with an appropriation of the planet. That is, you can only have Hegel's master-slave dialectic in a world of industrial agriculture, really. You know, you've got to have appropriation and so that. So I assume when we say we need a political reading of this, we're going back to some sort of Marxist notion of the division of labour between humans, among humans. And when we say geological, we want to go back to a division of labour between humans and non-humans. Because if you and I can fight to the death over this, then this is part of the economy. That's what I mean by geological. And what went into the emergence of the discourse of politics is geological in a weak sense, in a planetary sense. So maybe, but I like personal as geological rather than personal as. Personal is global sounds.
We may need one more
Sorry.
question, and then we will imagine a counterfactual where we actually keep...
Finish on time? Yeah. I did my bit.
I was actually wanting to go back to something you mentioned about Aboriginal cosmopolitanism. And I was actually thinking that the sign of indigeneity returns constantly in any discussion of the Anthropocene. It's almost like Monday. But what was interesting in relationship to what you were saying, but I was thinking that, you know, in a sense, pre-capitalist cosmology, and this doesn't have to be only Aboriginal, but
Sure.
parts of the world.
Yeah.
Almost always imagined extinction.
Yes.
And they were also quite often based on cyclic time, so that the extinction
Yeah.
would happen in certain periods, and then, you know, life would, some forms of life would emerge, and other forms of life would emerge. So in some sense, these were kind of pre-evolutionary
Sure.
narratives, but which
Yeah.
did not have any unilinear notion of
Yeah.
evolution. So there is an understanding of extinction, but there is not a fear of species extinction.
Yeah.
And I think this is very crucial because I seem to feel that what seems to happen with capitalism, which seems to be very well able to suppress many of these older timescapes,
Yeah.
but it engenders a very deep fear of species extinction. And I wanted to ask you how you think, or how you would articulate the relationship between species extinction in our now
Yeah.
and my extinction. And how
As
is
in personal.
yes.
Uh-huh.
How is the species extinction? How does that translate into an individual my or an I or
Yeah.
yeah?
I think this is an answer. I mean, in a way, the question itself is just interesting. So you could just, that's like you could start a conference on. So, you know. But here's, and I'm not using this as personal capital, but a friend of mine who was diagnosed with cancer and did then research, Gillian Howie, Deleuzian philosopher, and she said, she on one of her last lectures, which is YouTube, she says, everyone knows they're going to die, right? But somehow, why is it when giving you the prognosis, everything changes? Because you're not given, most part you're not going to get, you're going to die on May 4th, right? You knew you were going to die. But somehow, I'm sorry you've got cancer, you're going to die. We're going to treat you, so maybe it'll be okay. Still, it's not like, it's not a death sentence, but it changes everything. I actually think, going back to your first part, there's a sense in which this is, that you're right, there's apart from this stupid brief moment in hyper-consumption capitalist history that this could go on forever, you're absolutely right, because I had some grad students who were medievalists, and they were showing me all this stuff like play, you know, like I stupidly made the claim that Mary Shelley's Last Man was the first, you know, extinction. And they're like, are you kidding me? Plague narratives, like it was just like, hey, it's all going to go. No, it's all going to go. Right, so, okay. So you're right. But there's a different, hey, this is all going to go. We all knew it was going to end someday. And I think what's occurring now with climate change, and you've got to be careful when you go from individual psychology to, you know, when you say a culture's neurotic or a culture's psychotic or a culture is more. It seems to me we're now in the condition of having a prognosis. You know, like, of course this wasn't going to go on forever. Like, it's not like even the geologists thought, what? The human species is fine, you know, but it's almost as though you've been given a prognosis. And we haven't been given an exact date. We've been given some dates. Oh, it's going to get really bad around 2040. Right? That's when we're going to be on chemo, the equivalent of chemo and everything. But I think it's that when you say what's the analogy, I think we all know we die someday. We imagine, don't we imagine a life lived well in a natural. There's nothing catastrophic about one's own death. You don't die, you just rot. Yet we do feel there's something like an unnatural or truncated. Everyone dies, but every organism wants to die in its own way. And I think that's what's creating these sort of the narratives that people have been talking about, which is, I knew I was going to end, but did you have to throw it in my face? Like that, did we have to find out? Did you have to tell me it was because I smoked? Is basically what we're getting, isn't it? And then you get someone, or maybe it's like us here, but wait a minute, I didn't smoke, I wasn't driving, like I've been riding my bike for 45 years, don't ask me. So that's, yeah.
But it's gotta be the same drum part.
Let's save that. We have a wrap-up session.
Yeah.